There is one habit that is quietly working against your financial future, and I can almost guarantee that you did it today, maybe this morning, maybe in the last hour. It is not dramatic. It does not feel risky. In fact, most people would not even call it a habit. They would call it normal. But I want to show you today why this one thing, this single, widely accepted, socially normal habit, is quietly closing the doors of financial increase in your life. And once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it. Write this down. The habit is comparison, not the word, the practice. The moment you see someone succeed and something inside you tightens, the moment someone else's progress makes your own feel too small, the moment you measure what you have against what someone else was given, that moment, that exact inner movement, is the single most consistent financial block I have ever seen in human beings. And here is why. Write this down. Your financial energy follows your focus. I said your financial energy follows your focus. Think about what comparison actually does. When it turns on inside you, it takes your attention, your most valuable resource, and pulls it away from your own path, away from your own building, away from what God gave you to grow, and points it directly at someone else's life. And in that moment, you are not building, you are measuring. And measuring produces nothing. Only building produces. This is why two people can work equally hard and end up in completely different places. Not because one was more gifted, not because one was more lucky, but because one was building and the other was comparing. And the energy difference between those two actions compounds over months and years into a completely different financial reality. Write this down. Every minute spent measuring someone else is a minute taken from building yourself. Now let me get specific about what comparison actually costs you, because most people understand this in theory. They know comparison is not productive. They have been told not to compare themselves to others, but they still do it every day because they have never understood what it is really costing them. Not emotionally, financially. Here is the first cause. Comparison steals your strategic clarity. When you are always measuring your progress against someone else's position, the question driving your decisions becomes, how do I get what they have? Instead of the question that would actually build your future, what is the specific next step on my specific path? Those are completely different questions, and they produce completely different results. The first question makes you reactive. You are responding to someone else's life. You are trying to copy their journey, which was built on their specific gifts, their specific relationships, their specific timing, none of which apply to you. The second question makes you strategic. You are working from your own foundation. You are building toward your own assignment. You are making decisions based on your reality, not a performance of someone else's. And strategic decisions made consistently over months and years produce compounding results that reactive decisions never can. Write this down. The person who builds from their own foundation will always outperform the person who builds from comparison, given enough time. The second cost of comparison is this. It makes you impatient with timelines that are actually correct. Here's what I mean. Every meaningful thing takes longer than expected. Every business, every skill, every financial transformation, there is a season of building that feels slow, where the inputs are real, but the visible results are not yet proportional. And in that season, comparison is most dangerous, because you look at someone else who appears to be further ahead, and you decide that your timeline is wrong, that you should be further by now, that something must not be working. And you make a decision based on that conclusion. You walk away from what was actually working. You turn away from what needed more time. You switch strategies before the current one had the chance to compound. And then you start over from a new beginning because you could not tolerate the comparison long enough to let your original path produce. Write this down. Most abandoned strategies were not wrong. They were simply not given enough time. And comparison is what killed them, not their own weakness. The third cause of comparison is the most subtle one. It changes your identity slowly without you noticing, because what you consistently focus on shapes who you consistently believe yourself to be. The person who constantly measures themselves against people who appear to have more slowly develops a self-image built around lack, around inadequacy, around the feeling that what they have is never quite enough, that they are always behind, always catching up, always measuring from the wrong side of someone else's success. And that self-image, built from years of comparison, becomes the ceiling through which every opportunity is filtered. They see opportunities through the lens of, is this enough to close the gap? Not, is this the right next step for my specific path? And the answer to that first question is almost always no, because comparison always moves the target. Someone else always has more, so the gap never closes, and the person who is trying to close it remains permanently behind the target they are chasing. Write this down. You will never close a gap you did not create. Someone else's position is not a gap in your life. It is simply where they are. Your life is not behind theirs. Your life is running on a completely different track with completely different starting conditions, completely different gifts, completely different timing, and a completely different destination. You cannot be behind on someone else's track. You are not on their track. The only question that matters is how far you are from your own potential, not how far you are from someone else's results. Now, I want to give you something practical, because this is the point where most messages give you the insight but not the tool. Here is the tool. Every time comparison turns on, every time you catch yourself measuring your position against someone else's, stop. Not to suppress it, not to pretend it is not happening, but to ask a different question. Instead of, why do they have what I do not have yet, ask, what is the specific next step I should be taking right now on my own path? That redirect from comparison to strategy is the most financially productive thing you can do in that moment, because it returns your energy to the only place where it can actually produce something. Your own work, your own building, your own daily progress. Write this down. The redirect from comparison to strategy is worth more than any single financial decision you will ever make, because it is the meta decision, the decision about where your energy goes, and every other decision is downstream from it. The person who has mastered this redirect is not building faster necessarily, but they are building more consistently, with less wasted energy, with more accurate decisions, with a self-image that grows over time rather than one that erodes from constant comparison. And consistent, focused, self-directed building over months and years produces wealth. Not the person who was most inspired, not the person who had the best ideas, the person who was most consistent. Now let me speak about something deeper, because comparison does not only operate in the obvious moments. It does not only appear when you scroll through someone else's success. It works in a much more subtle form that most people never identify. It works in your standards. When you compare yourself downward, when you measure yourself against people who appear to have less than you, and you decide that you are doing fine, that comparison is equally damaging. Not because you should not be grateful for what you have, but because downward comparison, comparison that makes you feel comfortable, removes the productive discomfort that drives growth. The person who consistently compares down stops growing. Not dramatically, quietly. They level off at a place that feels acceptable because it looks better than what someone else has. But acceptable is not the same as fully expressed. Comfortable is not the same as purposeful. Better than some is not the same as operating at the level God designed you to operate at. Write this down. The standard for your financial life should not be set by what others have or do not have. It should be set by what God placed inside you and whether you are moving toward it. That is the only comparison that matters, the comparison between your current position and your actual potential. And that comparison, honestly made, regularly checked, and used to drive daily action, is not destructive comparison. It is the only comparison worth your attention. Now let me speak about what happens when you truly release comparison, because I want to be honest. This is not simple. The habit is deeply rooted. It is culturally reinforced at every level. The economy runs in large part on comparison. Social media is an architecture of comparison. Advertising is built entirely on comparison. Even education in most systems is built on ranking people against each other. So releasing it is not a single decision. It is a practice, a daily redirecting of where you place your attention. But as you practice it, as you consistently catch the comparison, interrupt it, and redirect to your own path, something begins to shift. The tightening you feel when someone else succeeds slowly loosens. Not because you stop caring about your own progress, but because their success stops feeling like proof of your inadequacy. You can celebrate what they built without it costing you anything, because their track and your track are not competing for the same resources. There is enough track for everyone. And the moment you genuinely feel that, not intellectually, but in your gut, your energy becomes available for building in a way that comparison was always blocking. Write this down. When you stop measuring other people's results, you free up enormous energy for building your own. And that freed energy, applied consistently to your specific path, is the financial shift most people have been waiting for without realizing what was actually required. Not a new strategy, not a new opportunity, not better timing. A redirection of the energy that was always there, but was being consumed by comparison. The money was not blocked by circumstance, it was blocked by focus. Redirect the focus and watch what consistent energy can build. That is the work. Not complicated, not dramatic, daily, steady redirecting. Let me add something important here that most people skip. The redirect from comparison to your own path is not a one-time decision. It is a practice. And like all practices, it requires a specific daily trigger. Here is what works. Every morning, before you open any platform, before you see anyone else's progress or positioning, spend 5 minutes reviewing your own, not comparing it to anyone else, just your own. Where were you 3 months ago? What have you built since then? What is the specific next action on your specific path? This 5-minute practice does something that no amount of inspiration can do. It makes your own path feel real. Because the problem with comparison is not only that it pulls your energy outward, it is that it makes your own path feel abstract while someone else's feels concrete. You can see their results. You cannot always see your own developing capacity, and what is invisible feels less real. But when you consistently review your own progress, when you make a habit of measuring your movement on your own track, your own path becomes the concrete thing, and other people's positions become less relevant. Not because you stop caring about your own progress, but because your own is now clearly visible to you. Write this down. What you measure becomes real to you. What you track becomes what you build toward. Measure your own progress. Track your own movement. Build toward your own potential. And let what other people are building be evidence of what is possible, not evidence of what you lack. That reframe alone is worth more than any financial strategy you will ever learn, because it redirects the most valuable resource you have, your focused daily energy, back to where it was always meant to go. Your own path, your own building, your own financial future. Now, I want to address something honestly because I know that some of you have tried to stop comparing before. You made the decision, maybe after a message like this, maybe after a hard season where comparison cost you something real. And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you were more focused. And then something happened. You saw someone else's success at exactly the wrong moment. Or the slow season lasted longer than you expected. Or you simply forgot what you had decided, and the comparison returned. I want to speak to that directly, because the failure to maintain the redirect is not a character flaw. It is what happens when a deeply rooted habit is not replaced with an equally rooted one. You cannot simply remove comparison. You have to replace it with something. And the replacement, the redirect to your own path, has to be practiced until it becomes automatic, until it is what your mind does by default. When someone else's success enters your awareness, not absence of awareness, automatic redirect. This is the difference between people who talk about not comparing and people who actually stop. The ones who talk about it try to suppress the comparison when it appears. The ones who actually stop have built a redirect so automatic that the comparison barely gets a foothold before the mind is already back on its own track. That automatic redirect is built through repetition. Every time you catch the comparison and consciously redirect, you are building the pathway that eventually makes the redirect automatic. Not after 1 week, after months of consistent practice. Write this down. You are not trying to stop a thought. You are training a new automatic response. And training requires repetition, not perfection. Every single redirect counts. Even the ones that came after the comparison was already running for several minutes. Every redirect strengthens the pathway. Every time you catch yourself and return to your own track, no matter how long you were off it, you have just practiced. And the practice, built across months, produces the automatic response that makes comparison less frequent, less sticky, and less damaging to your financial focus. So when you fall back into it, do not decide that you failed. Decide that you caught it and redirect. That is the practice. Now I want to give you one more specific tool. Before this message ends, when you notice comparison turning on, before you redirect to your own strategy, take one additional step. Genuinely acknowledge what the other person built. Not performatively, not as a spiritual exercise, actually acknowledge it. They worked to get where they are. They made decisions, sacrifices, efforts that you did not see. Their position is the result of their specific path, not proof that yours is insufficient. That acknowledgement does two things. First, it dissolves the comparison, because comparison requires you to treat their success as if it came at your expense, as if them getting it means less is available for you. But when you genuinely acknowledge what they built, when you recognize that their result is the product of their specific work, it stops feeling like something taken from you and starts feeling like something built by them. And that reframe breaks the emotional charge that makes comparison so sticky. Second, it trains your mind to connect other people's success with possibility rather than threat. The person who sees someone else succeed and thinks that proves it is possible is operating from a completely different financial mindset than the person who sees the same success and thinks, why not me? Same facts, completely different interpretation, completely different energy directed toward their own work. Write this down. Other people's success is evidence of what is possible, not evidence of what you lack. Make that reframe daily. Every time you see someone building something real, and over time, your relationship with other people's success will shift from threat to inspiration, from a thing that drains your energy to a thing that fuels it. And that shift, quiet, gradual, and enormously powerful, is one of the most important financial changes you will ever make. Not because the strategy changed, but because the energy behind the strategy changed. And consistent strategy with energized, focused effort is what actually builds financial momentum. Let me close with something very direct. The habit I described today, comparison, is not going to disappear overnight. And I want to be honest with you about that, because messages like this sometimes create a false expectation of sudden transformation. You hear the insight, you feel the shift, and then reality continues unchanged because the habit is still running, and people decide the insight was wrong. It was not wrong. The timeline was wrong. So let me give you a realistic expectation. In the first week of practicing the redirect, you will catch comparison after the fact, after it has already run for several minutes, sometimes after it has already cost you energy. That is fine. That is the beginning. In the first month, you will start catching it earlier, in the middle of comparison rather than after. After 3 months, you will begin catching it at the start before it fully activates. After 6 months, the redirect will become more automatic. You will notice someone else's success, and the redirect to your own path will happen faster, sometimes before the comparison has a chance to take hold. That is the trajectory. Not instant, not dramatic, consistent. And that steady development, maintained through the months when nothing seems to change, is what eventually produces the financial shift that the comparison habit was blocking all along. Write this down. Patience with the practice is part of the practice, because the person who expects instant results will quit before the practice has time to work. And the person who understands that real change takes the time it actually takes and keeps building anyway, that person arrives. So start the redirect today. Give patience to the process and trust that consistent daily practice produces what no single insight ever could. The results will come. Not because the strategy is magic, because focused daily energy applied to your own path is the most powerful financial tool available. And you have it right now, starting with today's redirect. One final thought before I close. The redirect I have been describing, from comparison to your own path, is not just a financial practice. It is a practice that changes the quality of your daily life, because comparison does not only block money, it blocks presence. The person who is constantly measuring their life against someone else's is never fully present in their own. They are always somewhere between here, where they actually are, and there, where someone else appears to be. And that in-between place is where most of life gets lost. The conversation they were in, but not fully present for, because they were mentally somewhere else. The progress they made, but could not appreciate, because they were measuring it against a higher bar. The moment that was actually good, that felt insufficient because someone else's moment appeared better. Write this down. Comparison costs you presence. And presence is where life actually happens. The life that is worth building, the financial life, the relational life, the life of genuine purpose and satisfaction, that life is built in the present, in the actual moments, in the real conversations, in the work that is being done today, not in the measuring, not in the comparing, not in the space between here and where someone else appears to be. Here is the truth. When you redirect from comparison to your own path, you are not only reclaiming financial energy, you are reclaiming your life. The moments that were being spent in the gap between your reality and someone else's are returned to you to be spent in your own life, building your own path, experiencing what is actually here. That is what the redirect ultimately offers. Not just more financial focus, a more fully lived life. And a more fully lived life, one where you are genuinely present, genuinely building, genuinely engaged with what is actually yours. That life tends to produce more connection, more creativity, more real progress, and yes, over time, more financial results. Because a person fully present in their own work does better work than a person constantly distracted by what someone else is doing. So the practice is simple. When comparison appears, redirect to your own path, to your own work, to what is actually here. Do it daily. Do it patiently. Do it even when it does not feel like enough. because the person who stays on their own path consistently, patiently, without being pulled off by comparison, arrives somewhere real, somewhere that was built specifically for them by the daily choices they made to stay in their own lane and do their own work. That is available to you. Stay with this channel. More truth is coming.